Hello there. Today I wanted to put the cost of living crisis into perspective. So I have two pie charts here. This is from thousands of years ago, back when we were cavemen. This is modern day. Okay, so thousands of years ago, we would spend the majority of our time and energy hunting for food and gathering food. Now we didn't have money or currency, so all we had really was what we spent our hours doing, our time and our energy. So I think about 90%, 95% of our time was spent hunting, most of our days, of our waking hours this is. And a little bit of time, whatever was left over, was of course enjoying the food, the meal times, the family, and, any sort of social rituals that went on. Fast forward to modern day, where we are now, and quite a small proportion of our money is spent on our food, what we eat day to day. I don't know what the actual figure is. I probably should have researched that. I don't know. It's quite small. I assume it's like less than a quarter, maybe less than 20%. I don't know. And of course, nowadays we have money and currency to equate value. So we spend a lot of time working to gain money, and then we spend that money where we see fit. And of course, a proportion of that is going towards our food. But of course, I would argue that it's significantly less than where we started out. We started out spending most of our days gaining food. Now we spend, possibly less than 5 to 10% of our days acquiring food in the form of currency through our work. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now, I'm not telling you to go back to this model where we go hunting. That's not viable. It's not possible in our modern age. It's not viable, and that had just been plain silly, really. So I'm not suggesting people should spend more on their food necessarily. As I've said in previous videos, I think people should spend and choose the food that they believe is going to support them for their health and their enjoyment, and spend as much as they see fit on acquiring the right quality foods. But I'm not suggesting anybody spends more necessarily. I think we should save our money where we can and allocate it into our life where we deem it to be fit. Where I do have a problem is as a society we've undervalued the food itself. So we have a scenario where farmers are, dropping out of the industry and losing their jobs, and it's not a very pretty industry to be a part of. I'm a farmer, by the way, if you haven't been on my channel before. And a lot of farmers are quitting and selling up, and it's an aging population because it's difficult day to day, yes, but frankly the financial incentives aren't there, so it's not really a profitable industry for a lot of people to be in. So there's that going on, and we're not being incentivized to produce good quality food. Meanwhile, we still have a cost of living crisis going on, and people are still complaining that food is too expensive in their lives. Which, listen, I don't have a problem with the people saying food is too expensive. That's a subjective thing, of course, but I believe that might be true. People are struggling to pay for food and to sustain themselves and their families. And that's horrific. That's very sad to hear. Very sad to hear. And one of my aims as a farmer is to provide affordable nutrition to people, ideally to my local community, because that's what's sustainable. I'm not out here me and my colleagues, my industry, are not trying to rob people of their money and gain an unfair price for the produce that we bring to the marketplace. We're just trying to do our part, because I understand the society we live in nowadays. We also are bound to spend money on things like entertainment, things like our social lives, including going on holiday, going away, vacation time. So I'm not arguing we go back to caveman times and we just hunt for our food and then sit in a cave. I'll be honest, that does sound quite fun, but maybe for a weekend, and I'd like to come back to normal life. Like I said, my argument is with the system. We've gone through a period in the last century where food has been devalued, especially since the World Wars, when farmers needed to get subsidised in order to produce food that was affordable for the country. Our country is the United Kingdom, but this happened all over the world at different times and different cycles over history. So that's my argument, is that we need to accelerate this slow process of bringing value back to things that should be valued, basically a fair value for things. Okay, I think clothes are too cheap on the whole. That needs to come up, because something like the clothing industry, textiles, that's arguably getting subsidized by stuff like it's like slave labor and child labor, right? In some of the more eastern countries where a lot of textiles are produced. So that's getting subsidized. Farmers for decades have been subsidized for the work they do by the government instead of getting paid fairly for the produce. Okay, so that's the way it is. I don't have a problem with that. I see why it was needed. However, we need to always be pushing back to a free market, a free marketplace, and fair value for the produce on there. Same for clothes, same for vehicles, same for food, same for entertainment. I believe that's how capitalism should work and how the free market should work. When we're getting, I've always made the example, sorry for the stutter, I've always made the example in farming and food production that we are a private sector getting publicly funded. So we should be a private sector, however we're getting publicly funded by subsidies. So it doesn't quite make sense. Do you see what I mean? It's listen, the person that suffers at the end of the day is usually the consumer. So we're in this point now where we've got a cost of living crisis for a lot of people, and the consumer is the person that suffers. Even though I think food is super cheap at the minute, but the consumer's suffering because of some very skewed prices of housing prices and the cost of living in terms of all sorts, vehicles as well. So I want to get back to a middle ground. I think that's what's needed. We need a middle ground. We're never going to go back to these days, thank goodness, but we need to even this up. And I hope that makes sense. Thank you for watching this whiteboard presentation. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.